I talked to Eric Staal yesterday for a while. He sounds like somebody who's in such a good space. He really said that he never thought he would come back, even though he didn't retire last year. He was sort of leaving it open just in case, but he told me, like, if somebody had called, it would have been a tough ramp up to get ready to play, especially if you think about what the playoffs were like. And I know you wrote about it very well in the NNO this week. But Staal as a Hurricane, for a lot of people, it's kind of complicated because he wasn't popular with the fans in the last 3 or 4 years of his careers. Like he was almost a target when he shouldn't have been. He was like the only great player they had.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is when you go back to that, that sort of decade without a playoff appearance, for a good chunk of that, especially as the team fell into decline from sort of the high point of the 2011 All-Star game, Eric Staal had been for some time, but was then the face of the franchise.
Right.
And he bore the brunt of all of that anger, fairly or unfairly. And I think, if you look back at it, certainly with how quickly things flipped, this is 2 years after he was gone, but how quickly things flipped when Justin Williams became captain, I think there was sort of some slippage in the culture, a culture of accountability that maybe you can trace, to him sort of kind of running out of emotional gas as much as anything. But the reality is, it's not his fault. Those teams were terrible.
Yeah.
He was doing his best to keep an underfinanced, poorly coached, badly led franchise. He was doing his best to keep it above water. That said, he was the face of one of the most dismal periods in the history of the franchise. And he was also never traded away. He never got that big exit because Ron Francis waited until he had 2 months left on his contract to dump him. Instead of giving Eric Staal a chance to go somewhere and be a star again and get something for him, Ron Francis basically ground him down to a nub and then sold him for parts. One of many of Ron Francis's GM malpractices during his not brief enough tenure. But I think when you look at Eric Staal's career, people do remember that part of it, which is terrible because people forget he was amazing in '06. I mean, he had one of the most incredible seasons by any Hurricanes player ever, arguably the best season by any Hurricane, best single season. Although I think in retrospect, as long as we're retconning some of this stuff, Jeff O'Neill doesn't get nearly enough credit for his 40-goal season in 2001. I mean, that's like a 90-goal season in 2024. The Jeff and the team hadn't been here that long. We thought Jeff O'Neill was going to score 40 goals every year.
Right.
That wasn't it. I'm losing my train of thought here. Eric Staal in 2006 was, as Eric Cole told me the other day, everything Staal he touched turned to gold. 100 points, several hat tricks, led the playoffs in scoring. Was a candidate for the Canadian Olympic team, which is incredible when you think about how deep that group is, won the Stanley Cup. And the crazy thing is, you got to the end of the playoffs, he wasn't even, I think he was maybe fourth pick for the Conn Smythe, because you had all the Edmonton guys pushing Chris Pronger when they were down 3-1, and then they all voted for Cam Ward. Nothing against Cam. Rod Brind'amour should have won it. You and I both know that.
Yep.
Eric Staal was arguably the best player on the ice for 2 months and didn't get a sniff. He was incredible. The great moments in franchise history, you go to like the shock at the Rock. I mean, he played such a key role in so many of them. I do think he's fourth. It is Ron Francis for what he did to establish this franchise here. It's Rod Brind'amour, Glenn Wesley, like Ronnie, just a pillar of the early days, and then Eric Staal to me is fourth on that list, and was the team's first true, real homegrown star. And was under tremendous pressure from the day he was drafted to be that. And in the end, despite the way it ended, he delivered. So, I think this is a great honor. That they've done a much better job of sort of recognizing past greats with the Hall of Fame. And now this sort of taking it to another level, acknowledging that Eric Staal rises above the level of just the Hall of Fame, which I agree that he does. He was back for the Islanders game, the second game of the Islanders series, the one where they pulled off the crazy comeback.
Right.
And I remember talking to him in the locker room afterwards, and he seemed, as you said earlier, was that it's such incredible peace then, not just with his career being over, but with being back in Raleigh and looking at what the franchise had become, sort of resurrected from when he left, but also seeing the team pull off some of that crazy stuff that it pulled off when he was there. And we were kind of laughing about that, how Jordan used to have to watch Eric's teams do that, and now Eric was watching Jordan's team do that. It was great to see him then. I'm happy for him now. It's a long overdue thing, and hopefully a little bit like it was. You remember we talked about this when Cam Ward went into the Hall of Fame. Things got ugly with Cam Ward at the end, too. But you can't ignore his contributions to the franchise. Those deserve to be recognized and honored. The same is true of Eric Staal. They both kind of went down with the ship, but there were some great times. They brought a lot to the franchise. They're a big reason why it's still here and why it's flourishing today.
Luke DeCock is joining us here in the Adam Gold Show. When I talked to Eric about it, I asked him about a couple of goals. I asked him about the goal against the Devils in 2006 in Game 2. How does that play even happen? John Madden won the faceoff too well. It was a dump and chase into the corner that Justin Williams dug out and threw it in front, and there's Eric Staal. But the goal that sealed Game 7 in New Jersey in 2009, the shock at the Rock, you couldn't see it because he was on the phone, but you could hear him kind of light up, goes, that's the goal that I will always remember. That was one of the great goals in Hurricanes history, and he had a lot of moments, nothing like that necessarily, but he had a lot of great moments. He scored the goal in overtime after Rod Brind'amour tied it in Game 2 against Montreal. Staal scored a ton of big goals for this team, and Aho's going to break all his records, but I don't think that takes anything away from Eric at all.
The guy you need to have on to talk about Eric, and if I liked you better, I'd text you his number, is Marty Brodeur, because Eric Staal basically ruined the end of Marty Brodeur's career. You look at all those Devils series, when Eric Staal got to the Hurricanes, Marty Brodeur never won a playoff series against them again. And, 2006, Brodeur smashing his stick on the glass, the Staal goal after the Madden face-off win/loss you mentioned, obviously the goal in Game 7 in 2009, and then, hey, poor Marty was here last year with the Devils, watching them get smoked again in PNC. It's not like he has good memories of this building, but Eric Staal is the reason for a lot of them. And I don't think anyone got in his kitchen more than Eric Staal in the playoffs in sort of the latter third of Brodeur's career. And you're talking, this is not some schlub. We're talking about, one of the 2 or 3 greatest goalies of all time.
No question.
And Eric Staal had his number, no question about it.
All right. Earlier in the week, Martin Necas signed a 2-year deal, $6.5 million annual average annual value. I don't know why I can't say that right. What were your thoughts? I know we've talked about Marty before. Once the Jake Gensel thing fell through, I always thought that there was going to be a return of Necas, and I still think that there is maybe a 50-50 chance that this is a long-term relationship, not just a 2-year return.
Yeah, they've got 2 years to figure it out, or really a year to figure it out. Because if you are going to move him, you want to do it with a year left on his deal, whether that's a sign and trade or just a straight trade. You want to do it while there's still some value there, obviously. But to me, it was less related to Gensel. I think even when Gensel left, whether it was at the draft or draft weekend, if there was a player-for-player deal to be done for Necas, I still think they would have done it. They just really didn't like any of the offers that were out there. And now you kind of had to, they both sides had to go back to the table and say, hey, if this isn't going to happen, how can we make this work? And I think this is a fair deal. It's a reward for what Marty Necas has done and earned, but it also leaves a lot on the table for the future. And because he'll be going straight into unrestricted free agency, really anything is possible here. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I mean that as a good thing. The options for both sides are totally open. There is, I think, I don't think there's any bad blood here, and people are like, oh, how are Marty and Rod going to get? Well, I don't think there's an issue there. I do think there is some mending of fences to be done, because the reality is Martin Necas has not played to the level he is capable of here. And look, he's not alone. Andrei Svechnikov has to play better than this for the Hurricanes to succeed, especially in this new look group. But Martin Necas has so much more to offer, and we've seen flashes of it. The Hurricanes have to figure out a way to get that out of him, and he has to figure out a way to deliver it and self-motivate to play that way. We've seen him do it. We know it's out there. This, again, for the second time in 3 years, this will be the most important season of Martin Necas' career. But I do think that they've got to figure out how to get on the same page, not necessarily in a getting along sense, but in a, if Marty Necas is going to be here, he either has to change to fit our system better, or we have to tweak our system to make more room for him. Because the reality is he's faster with the puck on his stick than off of it. And until that changes, they're never going to be able to count on him defensively. And until that changes, he's not going to play center, which is what he wants to do. I don't think he's a center. I don't think the Hurricanes think he's a center. Marty Necas thinks he's a center. And until that's resolved one way or the other, this is never going to really simmer down. I don't think that's a bad thing. Players have different opinions of themselves and teams all the time. But I do think for him to be at his best and for the Hurricanes to get the most out of him, they're going to have to sort of at least come to some sort of common ground on that at some point.
I think for the most part, whether it's center or not, and I've spoken to Rod about this, his fear, and it was the same way with Aho, because he was never convinced that Aho was a center. Not that he couldn't play it, but that if he plays it, do I get the same level of offensive ability out of him if he's playing in the middle as opposed to playing on the wing? Aho convinced him of that by performing. I think with Necas, it's as much about responsibility as anything else. And they are going to lean on him this year in every possible way. I mean, he's going to be on the first power play unit because how many guys on the roster are even capable of being on the first power play unit? They might only have one unit this year. He's also, I think, going to kill penalties, which is something that he was doing a few years ago. He wasn't bad at it, but Seth Jarvis came in, took that job, and became one of Carolina's best at it. So he's going to have to do it. Teuvo Teravainen is gone. We don't know what the status of Jesper Fast is. We're a few weeks away, maybe 2 weeks away from figuring out whether Fast is going to be available to this team at the beginning of the year, or maybe, I mean, anything is possible with Jesper Fast, including retirement. So I just think it's more about responsibility than anything else. And let me just lead you to Seth Jarvis real quick, because there's about $9 million in cap space. I don't think it's going to take nearly that much to get Jarvis's signature. What are your thoughts on what that number will look like and Jarvis as a player long term?
Well, I want to circle back to the Jesper Fast thing for a second, because
Sure.
You didn't sort of complete the loop on Marty Necas and Jesper Fast, which is if Marty Necas really wants to prove he's a fit here and a contributor here, he can go on that Jordan Staal line, play at their level defensively, and be the guy to start turning some of those chances into goals. If he can do that, then the sky's the limit for him. So I don't think they're going to use him there, but if he really wanted to prove himself, he should say, put me there, I can play like Jesper without the puck and do things he can't with the puck, and suddenly this line that generates all these chances in zone time and possession time that doesn't finish, I'm going to finish those chances, or at least set up chances that Jordan Staal and Jordan Martinic or whoever can finish. That's if Marty Necas wants to make a splash, and you know, to me that's the sign of a player like, you know, you go back to the old Steve Yzerman story. When you're ready to commit to that 200-foot game, that's a way that he can show it, and it would have a tremendous impact on this team, because if you can get that line scoring at the rate that it creates chances, you got something. I don't know that it ever will, because it's some of that's a function of how it creates those chances, but still. Anyway, as far as Jarvis goes, you know, my guess is at this point, I assumed going into July that we were going to end up with a 7 or 8 year deal somewhere around that $7 and $8 million mark. I think that is sort of the range they're talking about. I think there's a mental hurdle there about where does he fit on either side of Andrei Svechnikov's 775. And I don't think the sides agree on which side of that Seth Jarvis should be. I think the Hurricanes want to keep their salary structure with Svechnikov ahead, and Jarvis feels like he's earned probably $8 million, which I think is probably a fair number. So that's, and again, this is not some big deal. That is typical of negotiation.
Mm-hmm. Who do you think's better? Who do you think's better, Jarvis or Svechnikov?
You know, I mean, the argument was made to me that there isn't a team in the league that wouldn't take Svechnikov over Jarvis. I actually would. I'm not saying Seth Jarvis is better, but I think he does more, and I think he probably helps you win more.
Yeah, I agree. And that's not I don't think that's a knock on Svechnikov.
I agree. And can Andrei Svechnikov change that?
Mm-hmm.
Does Andrei Svechnikov have more potential than Seth Jarvis? 100%. Andrei Svechnikov has the potential to be one of the 10 to 15 best players in this league.
Mm-hmm.
It's in there. It's in his feet. It's in his hands. It's in his brain. It's in his heart. He's got to find a way to get all the pieces together. But right now, if I'm building a team and I've got Seth Jarvis, who's younger, who plays in all situations, who also plays very physical, who has that sort of Scott Walker mentality on the ice. He's a little bit crazy out there. He's a little bit crazy in the locker room.
Yeah.
To me, would I have a problem giving Seth Jarvis 8 for 8? No, because I feel like that's where he fits on the roster. I understand if that's the issue, why the Hurricanes wouldn't want to do that. So maybe if you're Seth Jarvis, you bet on yourself, you sign for 2 years at 4.5 or 5, and you put yourself in a position where you have arbitration rights. And then if you continue to play the way you did this last season, you're looking at 9 or 10 a year.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see anything other than an 8-year deal here based on all of the conversations I've had. I think we're going to have an 8-year deal. It's going to fall somewhere in between Andre and 8, if not right at 8. Statistically speaking, if you look at percentage of salary cap, when Andre signed his, the identical deal in terms of percentage would be about 8.5. I think it'll come in under that. I'm pretty sure it'll come in under that. So in terms of percentage of the cap in current day, in real time, it's going to be a lower percentage than Andre signed for, but because the cap is bigger now. So
that makes sense. I think if there was going to be an 8-year deal, it would have been signed by now. I think the fact that it hasn't means we're actually, and again, I thought going into free agency that's where we would end up. I think the fact that we're getting into August and that hasn't happened by now not only puts the bridge deal on the table, but may at this point make it the more likely option.
Luke DeCock, my friend, appreciate your time. At Luke DeCock on Twitter. Go Cubs this weekend over the Cardinals.
No, man, nothing better than walking one off over the Cardinals. Nothing.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, bud.
Peace.
Yeah,
Luke DeCock here on the news from the News and Observer.